Hello and welcome to the second in our series of In Conversation. I'm Louise from ATS and I'm joined today by Julian Humphrys, who is a respected historian, writer, guide, broadcaster, expert in many things, castles, battlefields, and now a trustee at the Battlefields Trust as well. Welcome, Julian. Thank you for joining me.
Nice to see you, Louise.
So, strange times for all of us at the moment. I'm almost bored of saying strange times, aren't you?
Very strange times.
But I wondered what would you normally be doing at this time of year? What would you be up to?
Well, normally I would be in Burgundy because I do a lot of guided tours around UK and overseas. And I'll be just coming to the end of my tours programme. So I do guided tours to places like castles in England, but also to France, to Carcassonne, to Normandy and what have you. And that's where I should be at the moment. But for obvious reasons, I'm not. In fact, I've had 25 tours cancelled this year. So I've had quite a lot of time at home. But it's okay because I've caught up with reading, got involved in a bit of research, tried to sort out my study, which is a major operation at the best of times as there's books and papers everywhere. So it's very different to normal. Normally I'm seeing all sorts of places. At the moment, I'm seeing mainly 4 square walls.
And what are you going to be doing over the next few months? Do you know?
I'm doing a little bit of writing, actually. I'm always got that in the background. So I do articles for magazines and podcasts and things like that. I'm hoping that the tours will start again in March, but who knows? And depending upon, what our lockdown regulations are, I might be able to do some outside work. I've been doing 1 or 2 walks around battlefields and castles and things over the last month or so. So we just have to wait and see about that, I suppose. So a bit of research, a bit of reading, maybe a little bit of guiding.
Good stuff. I know that you do lots and lots of things, not just battlefields, but to me, you're like the battlefield expert. I listened to a podcast that you did for BBC History, I think, where people phoned in with their questions about battlefields. There's nothing about battlefields that you don't know. It's like encyclopedic knowledge. When did you first sort of realise that was when did you first get really interested in that?
I suppose at university, when I was at university, I did history, and I got quite involved in papers dealing with things like the Crusades, the English Civil War, the Wars of the Roses, and there's lots of castles and battles in them. So I sort of got interested in it as a result of that. After that, I did a postgraduate year, and part of that, my sort of dissertation was on one Civil War battle. But I also got a practical placement, and that was at the National Army Museum down in Chelsea, which, tells the history of the British Army from early days up to the present day. So that's really where the battlefield side of it really sort of took off. I've kept doing it ever since. There's a lot I don't know, actually. And that one of the joys of it is that we keep discovering, through archaeology and research, more and more things. So, I've been at it now for, I suppose, at least 25 years.
And then what's changed in those 25 years? Surely a lot has changed in the field of sort of historical.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of battlefields, I would say that we know a lot more. We still don't know everything, but for example, we go back 25 years ago, we didn't really know, for example, where the Battle of Bosworth was. There's a visitor centre there, but it's not actually in on the site of the battle. And subsequent archaeology and research and metal detecting and things like that have enabled us to know where it is. A lot more has been found out about a lot of other battlefields. In fact, this week I've been helping Winchester University with a project to find out more about a Civil War battle in Hampshire, Battle of Cheriton, which actually isn't that far from your offices. It's in Alresford, which is sort of between Alton and Portsmouth. So, there's constant stuff being found out. Also, I suppose the interpretation is much better, isn't it? You go to a castle 30 years ago and you've got your guidebook and there's a number, isn't there? And somebody says, "Oh, what's that over there?" "Oh, that's number 3. And you'll get your book out and try and work out what it is. Now, it's much more interactive, isn't it? And of course, something that's great about ATS is all the things that you're able to do in that way. So I think that interpretation of castles, stately homes, battlefields, it's less a conversation between experts now, and it's much more a communication and understanding that people may not have the background information, so you've got to give them that and explain why these things are of interest and get the human stories out.
Exactly. And sort of we're always talking about how we can make history more engaging for people, and a lot of it is about making it relevant to people asking essentially the question, why should I care about this? Why is this interesting? Why is this relevant to me? When it comes to a battlefield, that's a big challenge for I guess a lot of people. It feels just like a field. How do you overcome that and make it engaging and relevant for people?
Well, obviously, if there's no interpretation, it's just a field. And actually, for most of that field's existence, it was just a field, with sprouts growing in it or cattle or whatever it's going to be, and it's only for one day in its existence that it was a battlefield. But, you've got to be able to tell the story. I remember when I started work for the Battlefields Trust, and this was a while back, and I thought, well, I'll just see what people think about battlefields. So I phoned up a tourist information centre that had a battlefield nearby, and I made out I didn't know anything about it. I said, oh, I see on the map that there's some crossed swords, and it says there's a battle here. What's all that about then? And this chap said to me, I wouldn't bother going there. It's just a field. And I thought, oh dear, I've got a bit of work to do, haven't I, if I'm going to enthuse people. But of course, they are much more than fields, aren't they? Because they are places where our history was forged. 1066, Battle of Hastings, Harold, William the Conqueror, 1485, Richard III, Cheriton, perhaps Naseby in the Civil War, where our parliamentary democracy, if it wasn't established, at least it was sort of on the step towards getting there. So there's that, I think. But also, if you go and walk around a battlefield, you do understand what happened and why much better. It takes somewhere like Flodden, which is a battle between England and Scotland up on the Scottish border. And it's by walking there that you get a sense of the problems that the two sides have with steep slopes and sort of boggy ground. It's all there, and you can see what they could see. So you've got that side of it. Obviously, in the ground, there's all kinds of treasures there. The recent work at Towton, which is just outside of York, Wars of the Roses battle, great load of skeletons were uncovered, which was pretty gruesome actually when you saw the wounds. But it didn't just tell you about the fighting; it told you what sort of men were like at that time. How tall they were, whether they had osteoarthritis, whether they had bad teeth. So you've got all that in the ground there. I think it is inspiring though, isn't it, to stand on the spot where something happened? I think so anyway. That sense of place, I think we all have it. And so, to go and stand where maybe Richard III made his last charge, in 1485, there's something about being there, I think. And also, they're places of memorial, because it's where your relatives and my relatives, our ancestors, there's a good chance that we've got some ancestor that fought in these battles, So it's part of our human family story as well. And ultimately, they're just people like us, aren't they? Perhaps that are having to fight there, and you can't help think, well, how on earth did they do it? Because I'm rather a timid individual, and put a spider in the room and I'll run out the door, and these people are having to sort of face death, across a very short space of area,
Have you been anywhere where the sort of interpretation, the wider interpretation, not just on the battlefield, has been really, really successful, really impactful in that way, that giving that immediacy and that kind of idea of these people who fought on these fields are just like you and I?
I think Culloden, but then I suppose I would say that because, we worked together on the interpretation there. But, I think we can be pretty proud of it, actually, because I think it's a very good interpretation at Culloden. So Culloden, 1746, the sort of last battle of the Jacobite rebellion. And in a way, I think it's such a bleak place that even if there was no interpretation, you get a kind of sense that something grim happened there. I don't know if you think that, but I do, But is it because I know in my mind that had happened, there? But you could the battlefield. You can walk around and you can see where individual clans were and individual units were. But a fantastic visitor centre, I think, which looks at that battle from both sides. So not just this regiment was there and this clan was there, but also who were in those clans, why they joined, what their experiences were. So, I think it's probably the best in the country. quite a way to go to it, but it's worth it, isn't it? When you get there.
I mean, and we didn't do this, so I can say that it's brilliant. But the 360 video that they did of the battle, where you feel completely surrounded by it, is very impactful.
Yeah, very much so.
And there's more and more of that kind of interpretation that we can now apply to those sorts of places to make it more immediate for people, I think. So in your 25 years as a tour guide, among other things, you must have met an awful lot of people and sort of witnessed an awful lot of different kinds of reactions and experiences to these places. Can you tell me, have you got sort of some anecdotes from your tours over the years?
Yeah, I mean, they're great. I love to do tours because you see it for the first time every time, because you're seeing it through the eyes of the people that are there. And people sometimes say to me, you know, have you been asked any stupid questions? I say no, because they're not stupid to the people that are asking them. You know, that's why they're asking that question. So it's great for that. But I suppose anecdotes. The first tour I ever did was Dover Castle. And, you know, it's up on the White Cliffs there, and it's very, very windy, and you can see France opposite. And I took an American group there, and we duly stood up at the sort of cliff edge and looked out to France, and a huge gust of wind blew one gentleman's spectacles off and down into the port of Dover. And I had to sort of explain for a while, actually, that probably we couldn't take the group down there and go and look for them. The last tour that I did actually was back in March, and it was a William the Conqueror tour. I do one in England, you know, we go to Hastings and Pevensey and what have you. But this one was William the Conqueror in Normandy, and we were going to look at where he was born, the Bayeux Tapestry, where he's buried, etc. So off we went, and bearing in mind this is March. And as we arrived, I got a phone call, and the office said, you've got to Bayeux, okay then, Julian? I said, yeah. They said, we got a bit of bad news. I said, what's that? Oh, the Bayeux Tapestry's closed because of COVID. Right. So all these people who've come specifically to see the Bayeux Tapestry, you know, they've got to tell them that they're not going to see it. But, you know, I usually find that a grim refusal to face facts gets you through life, doesn't it? So I was very upbeat and said, but never mind. You know, you can see where he was born, and Falaise, and you can see Caen, etc. All these places, all these beautiful cathedrals. Next morning, I got a phone call. All of those were closed as well. So I had to sort of gather the group together, and I said, you are interested in D-Day, aren't you? Because instead, I had to give them a D-Day landing beaches tour, because you can't really close the beaches. So that was perhaps the last and most challenging of my tours, where you have got to persuade 35 people that wanted to know about William the Conqueror, that they want to know about Montgomery and Rommel. But I think we carried it off. But perhaps the most moving tour I did a tour to Arnhem, you know, A Bridge Too Far, and the parachute landings in 1944 of the British Airborne. And I had a big group, and there was an elderly couple. They turned out to be brother and sister on the tour, and they walked around quite quietly. And they said to me over dinner, they said, oh, are we going to the cemetery at Oosterbeek, which is the main cemetery for the Arnhem landings? And I said, oh, yes, of course we are. And any particular reason? And they said, yes, our father's buried there. And they hadn't said until then, you know, and they just quietly come along because they wanted to understand what their father had been through. And, you know, we were able to sort of quickly go out and get them some flowers so they could lay it there. And really, it made it so worthwhile that, you know, you've got two people there with a real family link to it. And I think it made it worthwhile for everybody else as well. So that was probably one of my favourite moments. I'm getting all emotional saying it, you know, but that was probably my favourite moment on the tour.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's those kind of sort of, personal interactions and things that we're missing at the moment, isn't it, really? You must be missing doing those tours enormously.
Yes.
Well, to move on to something lighter, before we move on to a little bit about, you know, the future of battlefield interpretation, I've got some quick fire questions for you. I don't know how quickly you'll answer them, but we can go for it. Are you ready, Julian?
Okay. Yeah, I'll try and be brief. I find it hard.
So question number 1, what was your earliest cultural experience that you can remember?
Old Sarum. Old Sarum is this Iron Age fort, which is where the original Salisbury was before they moved it to where Salisbury is now. And I remember going there I must have been quite a tiny tot really, and it's these enormous ditches and banks there. And they're pretty enormous now, aren't they? If you go there, but as a tiny top, they seem huge, and so that I can still remember, these ditches. I like Old Sarum, and you go up there and you get a good view of Salisbury, and I particularly like it because you get a good view of Salisbury Gasworks, because my great grandfather designed those, so it's a kind of family link again, isn't it? So there we are, Old Sarum.
And the last exhibition you visited?
Well, a bit of an odd one, actually. It's on Stromboli. Stromboli, or sometimes we say Stromboli, but it's Stromboli, is this live volcano of Sicily. And it's got a little village on it. It's in the Aeolian Islands. It's got a little village that sort of perches between warning notices about lava and tsunamis. And it's got this kind of sense of perhaps impending doom that I find quite attractive in a strange sort of way. But anyway, on there, it's where Ingrid Bergman had her love affair with Roberto Rossellini, the film director. Ingrid Bergman, people, me in particular, I suppose, I think of Casablanca, beautiful actress in Casablanca. But she went there, she wrote to Rossellini and said, I'd like to work with you. And he said, come and film on Stromboli. And the house where they stayed is now a little exhibition about them. So it's another one of those on those very spots, isn't it? It didn't do her career much good in a way, because they had this love affair, and particularly in America, the more conservative aspects of America, they didn't approve of it. So it's a sort of boycott the film kind of idea. But there we are. So Stromboli, the exhibition about Ingrid Bergman on Stromboli, was my last one.
You can't get much more different than Old Sarum and Stromboli, can you? Your favourite city to visit for a cultural visit, and as we discussed, it's inappropriate really to have a favourite battlefield because it's obviously not a happy place, but your sort of where you most enjoy giving your tours.
Yeah. Well, I think that I've answered the battlefield one in a way. I mean, there are many that I find quite evocative, Towton, Bosworth, simply because of the historical importance of them. But it's got to be Culloden, really. But as you say, it's not really favourite. It's not a jolly thing. It's the most thought provoking, I suppose. So Culloden for that. Favourite place, I think Cambridge, and that's partly because I went to university there, so I had some pretty good times there in my early 20s. But I qualified as a tour guide there afterwards, so I got to stay there and I studied it. But I just love the place. Partly, I think, because, you've got this history of English buildings there, from something Saxon, like the Saxon church, through to wonderful buildings like King's College Chapel with its fan vaulting, one of the best buildings in the country, to lots of Christopher Wren, to sort of more modern buildings of the sort of modern movement. So you've got all of that there. But also, it's not a museum piece because it's still in use for what it was always in use for. So you've still got students doing what they've done for centuries. So I think that Cambridge is probably my favourite place. I got married there also, so I've got an added sort of.
Maybe you should have started with that.
Maybe I should actually. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually.
Never mind. Maybe I watched it.
Yeah.
And the last thing you bought in a gift shop?
It was a piece of fabric with a scene from the Bayeux Tapestry printed on it. And it's all about sort of presentation, isn't it? And the idea is that when I go on to the battlefield of Hastings and talk about Harold and whether he gets an arrow in his eye or what happens to him, I can unfurl this piece of fabric and show what the Bayeux Tapestry shows. So I bought that. £10 well spent, I thought.
Absolutely. And it leads neatly into my next sort of question and final question, really, which is about the future of sort of battlefield and historical interpretation in general, I suppose. And, you standing in a battlefield holding up a piece of fabric is to show people, this is what happened here. And of course we can do that with technology. Do you find yourself, on any of your tours thinking, I wish I had, this sort of digital toy that I could really bring this to life with, or, what do you think the future is?
Well, I see it slightly differently to that. I think that, and it's a good example is the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, which again, ATS has done work on. They have interpreters there, usually at weekends, and they really bring it to life, don't they? But they can't be there all the time. So it's what you do when the interpreters aren't there. And so, you know, when I'm on a battlefield with a group of people, I always feel that I can probably do a reasonable job of painting the picture and telling the story. But I'm not there all the time, am I? So what happens if people turn up the next day? What are they going to get? You know, well, they're not going to get anything. So I think it's to enable, where it's key with battlefields is to enable people to explore them on their own and get something out of it on their own. And so obviously something on their mobile phone would be relatively easy to do, the sort of handheld commentary, that sort of idea. In a similar way that you might use an audio device going around one of the stately homes or one of the museums. But, you know, I think there is quite an opportunity also for enhanced reality. So, for example, you know, you look at a hill at the moment, and it's just a hill. But if you were able to look through your phone, you might be able to, for example, have a situation where you have the troops laid out. So you line up the hill with your phone and you get an idea of what it would have looked like at the time. So that sort of thing. And I've seen that done in one or two castles, for example, where, you know, you go in and it's an empty room, but you look through a device and you can see, you know, where the seats might be or where the painting was, etc. So I think that's a real opportunity there, actually, in that way. And it's getting easier to do that kind of thing. But I think the demand is there. I mean, I go to Taunton quite often, and Taunton Wars of the Roses battle, but there's always people there. You know, whatever time of day, whether they're sort of at the battlefield or what they're up there for, I don't know. But it's usually people, you know, that have gone there on their own and are looking around at the boards that are there. I think you always need the boards because they give you a kind of physical confirmation you're in the right place. But, you know, if on the board you might have something where you can scan further information, it seems to me it would be a great way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've really enjoyed that conversation, Julian. I think we should wrap it up there. But thank you very much for joining me today. And I look forward to working with you, hopefully under more normal circumstances in the future.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
Thanks, Julian.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.